The son of a wealthy construction magnate, Osama bin Laden was initially a reserved and religiously inclined student of economics in Saudi Arabia. His life took a turning point after the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, where he reportedly used his family's resources and network to support and join the Afghan Mujahideen. That period played a major role in shaping his ideology, convincing him that global superpowers were deeply involved in harming the Muslim world. When he returned, he was no longer seen as just a participant in conflict, but as the founder of a new militant network known as Al-Qaeda, meaning the base. His campaign did not begin with one defining moment, but through a series of organized attacks on Western interests. The 1998 U.S. embassy bombings in Kenya and Tanzania brought him global attention. Later, the events of September 11, 2001 marked a historic and devastating attack that disrupted international travel, security, and financial systems across the world. For almost a decade afterward, he remained the most wanted individual globally, the central figure in an extensive international search. Intelligence efforts eventually traced him not to a remote hideout, but to a fortified compound in a Pakistani city. On May 2, 2011, U.S. Navy SEALs conducted a high-risk operation that lasted around 40 minutes, ending the long manhunt. His death was confirmed soon after, bringing closure for some and renewed tensions for others. He was later buried at sea to avoid his grave becoming a symbolic site. Although he was gone, the ideology associated with him continued to evolve into a more fragmented and widespread global movement. Before becoming one of the world's most infamous drug lords, Pablo Escobar started his life as a small-time criminal on the streets of Medellin, Colombia. In his early days, he was involved in smuggling and stolen cars, but his ambition was far greater than his beginnings. When the cocaine trade began booming in the 1970s, he quickly recognized its massive potential. He wasn't the one who created the trade, but he changed it completely by scaling it up and building global smuggling networks that spread across multiple continents. At the peak of his power, Escobar was counted among the richest men in the world, reportedly making millions every single day. His Medellin cartel ran on a ruthless principle: plata o plomo, silver or lead, soluzo meaning accept bribery or face violence. When the Colombian government started cracking down on him, he responded with open war. His cartel carried out bombings, assassinations, and acts of terror that shook the entire country. The situation escalated so much that both Colombia and the United States launched massive efforts to bring him down. The streets of Medellin turned into a battleground during the manhunt. Finally, on December 2, 1993, after about a year on the run, authorities traced a phone signal to his location. He was shot and killed while attempting to escape across rooftops in a Medellin neighborhood. His death marked the end of his reign, but not the end of the drug trade. It simply broke into smaller, less centralized groups. His private prison, La Catedral, later became a monastery, and his estate was turned into a tourist site. Today, his life remains widely known through movies, documentaries, and TV series. Al Capone started his early career working as a bouncer in a Brooklyn saloon, where a knife fight left a permanent mark on his face and earned him the nickname Scarface. He was once a small-time criminal with big ambitions, Pork attracted to a city where even law enforcement could be influenced by money. His real rise began in Chicago during the 1920s, a time when prohibition had made illegal alcohol highly profitable. Under the guidance of Johnny Torrio, he learned that while violence created fear, true control came from strong organization. When Torrio stepped down, Capone took full control and built a powerful criminal empire involved in bootlegging, gambling, and prostitution. Publicly, he maintained the image of a generous businessman, even running soup kitchens for the poor, while behind the scenes his organization controlled the streets through fear and force. That image collapsed on February 14, 1929, when his associates, dressed as police officers, killed 7 members of a rival gang in what became known as the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. The incident made him the nation's most wanted criminal and triggered intense federal action. A special unit of Treasury agents, led by Eliot Ness, began targeting his empire step by step. Despite his involvement in numerous violent crimes, prosecutors struggled to directly prove murder charges against him. Instead, investigators focused on his financial records, carefully tracking his hidden and illegal income. In 1931, Capone was finally convicted, not for violence, but for tax evasion on his criminal earnings. He was sent to Alcatraz prison, where his influence faded and his health deteriorated rapidly. After his release, he was a broken man, suffering from severe neurosyphilis. Joaquin Guzman Loera, better known as El Chapo, meaning Shorty, grew up in the rural poverty of Sinaloa, Mexico. He was raised in an environment closely linked to the drug trade, where success was defined by intelligence, ambition, and ruthlessness. He began his rise within the Guadalajara cartel, where he stood out not only for his ambition, but also for his logistical creativity. Instead of relying only on violence, he introduced innovative smuggling methods, including sophisticated air-conditioned tunnels built beneath the US-Mexico border, which greatly improved drug trafficking routes. After the breakup of the Guadalajara cartel, he established his own criminal organization, the Sinaloa Cartel. Under his leadership, it expanded into a powerful global network and became a multi-billion-dollar illicit enterprise. His growing influence made him a top target for both Mexican and US authorities, leading to his first arrest in 1993. However, what made his reputation infamous were not just his captures, but his escapes. In 2001, he managed to break out of a maximum security prison, reportedly hiding in a laundry cart, an event that embarrassed authorities and boosted his legend. After being recaptured in 2014, he escaped again through a mile-long tunnel that led directly into the shower area of his cell. This second escape triggered a massive national and international manhunt, turning the case into a matter of national pride for Mexico. A strange twist came when a secret meeting with actor Sean Penn indirectly helped authorities track him down. He was finally captured in 2016 and later extradited to the United States. The man who once engineered tunnels for escape now spends his life in a highly secure prison designed to prevent any possibility of escape. El Chapo's story stands as a reminder that even the most powerful criminal figures are ultimately part of systems that continue to operate long after they are removed. Dr. Josef Mengele was a highly educated man, holding advanced degrees in both anthropology and medicine. In 1943, he arrived at Auschwitz concentration camp, not as a prisoner, but as a physician with immense authority. At the selection platform, a simple gesture of his hand determined who would be forced into labor and who would be sent to their deaths. However, his role extended far beyond these decisions. He became deeply involved in conducting inhumane experiments on prisoners. He showed a particular interest in twins and children, using them for brutal and unethical research. With cold detachment, he exposed victims to diseases, carried out unnecessary procedures, and pursued experiments under the false justification of science. As Nazi Germany collapsed, Mengele managed to escape, aided by a network of sympathizers. For decades, he lived under false identities in countries like Argentina and Paraguay, avoiding capture. Despite being one of the most wanted Nazi fugitives, he remained elusive. Efforts by intelligence agencies, including Israel's Mossad, came close at times, but shifting priorities caused the search to lose momentum. He spent his later years living quietly, protected by a small group of supporters. In 1979, he suffered a stroke while swimming near the coast of Brazil and drowned. His death went unnoticed publicly for years. It wasn't until 1985 that his remains were officially identified, confirming that he had escaped justice. The man once known as the Angel of Death never faced trial, and his story remains a chilling reminder of unresolved accountability after the Holocaust. During the darkest years of the Great Depression, when banks were collapsing and people were losing everything, John Dillinger discovered his path. His early life involved small crimes, but it was his long prison sentence that truly shaped him, turning him into a more calculated and dangerous criminal. After his release, he launched a series of bank robberies that lasted about a year, capturing the attention of a struggling nation. Along with his gang, he carried out multiple heists with remarkable planning and precision, often making law enforcement look ineffective. Dillinger carefully built a public image as a charming outlaw, someone who targeted banks, the very institutions many blamed for their hardships. This made him a folk hero in the eyes of some, while authorities saw him as a serious and growing threat. His reputation only grew stronger with each bold escape. One of the most famous stories claimed he used a fake gun, carved from wood, to break out of a high-security jail, further adding to his legend. His actions directly challenged the newly developing Bureau of Investigation, led by J. Edgar Hoover. In response, Hoover labeled him Public Enemy Number 1 and created a special team dedicated to capturing him. After several close calls, authorities finally tracked him down in Chicago. A brothel owner, Anna Sage, often remembered as the Woman in Red, revealed his location in exchange for help with her legal troubles. On July 22, 1934, as Dillinger walked out of the Biograph Theater, federal agents surrounded him and shot him in a nearby alley. Even after his death, public curiosity remained intense, with crowds gathering to see his body. The operation that led to his capture also helped strengthen Hoover's agency, which later evolved into the powerful FBI known today. He was born Henry McCarty, but history would know him by a more evocative name. An orphan, adrift in the American frontier, his life of crime began with petty theft, a desperate act of survival. His path to notoriety was forged in the bloody Lincoln County War, a violent feud between rival merchant factions in New Mexico. He wasn't a leader, but a loyal fighter, a hired gun whose skills quickly earned him a reputation. Legends claimed he killed over 20 men, one for each year of his life. The reality was likely less than half that, but the myth was more powerful than the truth. His actions made him a wanted man, and the task of bringing him to justice fell to his former acquaintance, Sheriff Pat Garrett. Garrett captured him, and he was sentenced to hang, but in a stunning display of audacity, he escaped, killing 2 deputies in the process and cementing his legendary status. The manhunt resumed, with Garrett relentlessly tracking him across the territory. The trail led to a darkened room in Fort Snar on the night of July 14, 1881. In the pitch black, a voice asked, "Who is it?" and was answered not with words, but with a single gunshot from Garrett's pistol. The outlaw's death at 21 ended a short and violent life, but it was only the beginning of his story. Dime novels and sensationalized accounts published after his death stripped away the nuance of his life. Billy the Kid isn't just a historical figure anymore. He's become a key part of the Wild West legend, a symbol of rebellion whose name now stands for the romanticized and often exaggerated idea of the frontier. Little is known for certain about the early life of the man named Edward Teach. He began as a privateer, a state-sanctioned sailor fighting for the British during the War of Spanish Succession. When the war ended, he, like many sailors, turned to piracy, refusing to give up the freedom and fortune of life at sea. He captured a French slave ship, renamed it the Queen Anne's Revenge, and armed it with 40 cannons, creating a vessel that struck fear across the Atlantic. His power came not just from his firepower, but from his mastery of psychological warfare. He cultivated a terrifying image, braiding lit fuses into his long black beard so white to wreathe his face in smoke during battle. At his peak, he commanded a flotilla of ships and hundreds of pirates, culminating in his audacious blockade of Charleston, holding the entire port hostage. His brazen acts forced the governor of Virginia, Alexander Spotswood, to take action. He dispatched 2 naval sloops under the command of Lieutenant Robert Maynard, with a single objective to eliminate Blackbeard. Maynard cornered the pirate in Ockerokee Inlet, North Carolina on November 22, 1718. The battle was brutal and personal, with Maynard's crew ambushing the pirates after finding retreat. Teach fought ferociously, but was finally overwhelmed, suffering numerous gunshot and sword wounds before he fell. His head was removed and hung from the ship's bowsprit as proof of his demise. Despite the legends, no great buried treasure was ever found. His reign of terror lasted only 2 years, but his carefully crafted image endured for centuries. To the outside world, Ted Bundy was handsome, intelligent, and charming, a promising law student with a future in politics. This carefully constructed facade concealed a monstrous secret. In the mid-1970s, a dark pattern began to emerge across the Pacific Northwest and then spread to Utah, Colorado, and Florida. Young women were disappearing without a trace, their cases linked by a chillingly consistent profile. Bundy was a methodical predator who used his charisma as a weapon. He often feigned injury, wearing a cast or using crutches to lure his victims into a vulnerable position by asking for help. The hunt was a frustrating puzzle for law enforcement who were dealing with a type of killer they had never encountered, one who crossed state lines and left few clues. A routine traffic stop led to his initial arrest, but he escaped custody not once, but twice, making his way to Florida for a final brutal spree. His nationally televised trial became a media circus, with Bundy, a former law student, acting as his own attorney. His confidence was his undoing. The key piece of physical evidence that secured his conviction was a bite mark left on one of his last victims, which perfectly matched his dental impressions. He was found guilty and sentenced to death, his charm finally failing him under the weight of forensic science. Before his execution in 1989, he confessed to dozens of murders, though the true number of his victims remains unknown. The term serial killer was coined during the frantic effort to understand and categorize his crimes. Jesse James was a product of a divided nation, his teenage years shaped by the brutal guerrilla warfare of the Missouri-Kansas border during the Civil War. He fought for the Confederacy, learning a brand of violence that did not end when the war was over. Unwilling to accept defeat, James and his brother Frank, along with the younger brothers, applied their wartime tactics to a new profession. They became outlaws, robbing banks, stagecoaches, and trains with ruthless efficiency. They were more than just thieves. They were performers in a public drama. A sympathetic newspaper editor, John Newman Edwards, crafted a public image for James as a modern-day Robin Hood, a Confederate avenger striking back at a corrupt system. Their notoriety attracted the attention of the Pinkerton National Detective Agency, a private law enforcement group that became their sworn enemy. The hunt became intensely personal after a disastrous Pinkerton raid on the James family farm resulted in the death of his young half-brother. The event solidified public sympathy for James and turned the outlaws into folk heroes. The gang's invincibility was shattered during a failed robbery in Northfield, Minnesota, where outraged townspeople fought back. The botched raid led to the capture or death of most of the gang, forcing Jesse and Frank into hiding. With a large bounty on his head, the greatest threat to Jesse James came not from the law, but from within his own dwindling circle. On April 3, 1882, while dusting a picture in his home, he was shot in the back of the head by Robert Ford, a new recruit to his gang, seeking the reward money. His death did not end his story, it perfected it. Adolf Eichmann was not a battlefield general or a high-ranking politician. He was a bureaucrat, a logistics manager. His product was not steel or textiles, but human lives. As the head of the Reich's Office for Jewish Affairs, he became one of the chief architects of the Holocaust. He was obsessively efficient, coordinating the vast network of trains that transported millions to their deaths in extermination camps across Europe. His job was to solve the Jewish question, and he did so with the cold precision of an industrial planner. He organized the identification, assembly, and deportation of Jewish populations from every corner of the conquered territories. After Germany's defeat, Eichmann disappeared using a network of sympathizers to escape to Argentina, where he lived for a decade under a false identity. The hunt for him was relentless, led by Nazi hunters and the Israeli intelligence agency Mossad. In 1960, after a painstaking investigation, a Mossad team located him living openly in Buenos Aires. In a daring, covert operation, agents snatched him off a street and smuggled him out of the country to stand trial in Israel. It was an act that violated international law, but was seen by Israel as a supreme act of historical justice. The trial was a global media event, the first time many heard direct, detailed testimony about the mechanics of the final solution. His defense was simple and chilling. He was not an ideologue driven by hatred, but a functionary just following orders. His trial gave the world a new phrase to describe how ordinary people can commit extraordinary crimes, the banality of evil. Griselda Blanco was building her own empire. Her life of crime began on the streets of Medellin, Colombia, where she learned that ruthlessness was the key to survival. She moved to New York and then Miami in the 1970s, seeing the city as the perfect gateway for cocaine into the American market. She was a pioneer credited with inventing methods like using lingerie with hidden compartments to smuggle drugs. Her arrival in Miami marked the beginning of the city's most violent chapter, the era of the cocaine cowboys. She was infamous for her brutality, normalizing the use of motorcycle riding assassins for public hits. Her violent consolidation of power left a trail of bodies across South Florida, making her one of the most feared and wanted traffickers of her time. She was a ghost, constantly changing her appearance and location, making her incredibly difficult for the DEA to track. The hunt for the godmother of cocaine became a top priority for federal agents. After a decade-long investigation, DEA agents finally tracked her down, not in Miami, but living a quiet life in Irvine, California. She was arrested in her home in 1985 without a fight. She served nearly 2 decades in a U.S. prison before being deported back to Colombia in 2004. The world she returned to was one she had helped create, a place where the rules of violence she had written were still in effect. In 2012, while leaving a butcher shop in Medellin, the 69-year-old Blanco was killed. Griselda Blanco is now a legend in the world she dominated, a figure whose life proves that in the brutal meritocracy of organized crime, gender is irrelevant in the face of absolute power. On the day before Thanksgiving in 1971, a man in a business suit, calling himself Dan Cooper, boarded a flight from Portland to Seattle. He was unremarkable in every way, just another face in the crowd. Shortly after takeoff, he passed a note to a flight attendant, calmly informing her that he had a bomb in his briefcase. His demands were precise: $200,000 in unmarked bills and 4 parachutes. After landing in Seattle, the exchange was made, the passengers were released and Cooper's demands were met. He then ordered the pilots to take off again, flying south towards Mexico City at a specific low altitude. Somewhere over the dense, stormy wilderness of southwestern Washington, he did the unthinkable. He lowered the rear air stairs of the Boeing 727 and jumped into the night. The act triggered one of the most extensive and expensive manhunts in U.S. history. For months, investigators scoured the remote landscape, but found no trace of Cooper or his parachute. The case went cold for nearly a decade. Then, in 1980, a young boy on a camping trip discovered 3 packets of the ransom money, disintegrated but identifiable, on the banks of the Columbia River. The discovery only deepened the mystery, as it was far from any plausible landing zone suggesting the money had washed downstream. For over 45 years, the FBI pursued thousands of leads, but the identity of the hijacker was never confirmed. The case remains the only unsolved air piracy in American history. The investigation was officially suspended in 2016, a quiet admission of defeat. D.B. Cooper is no longer a suspect. He is an American myth. He represents the perfect crime, an unsolved mystery that proves a person can, with enough audacity, simply vanish from the world and into legend. This journey through the lives of the world's most wanted reminds us that a story doesn't end with capture or death. It ends with how it's remembered. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to give it a like and subscribe and leave a comment. Thanks for watching.